We know from archaeological evidence that religion has been a core part of human life longer than Homo sapiens have existed. As such, it predates any notion of race, ethnicity, or even war as an activity. It should come as no surprise then that religion often plays an important role in ethnic conflicts today, as it is so embedded in our societies and identities. Religion can start or more often sustain an ethnic conflict with relative ease, but conversely, it can also be used to foment and sustain peace. Its relationship with conflict is to some observers becoming increasingly important, as concepts such as religion and ethnicity are replacing nationalism as core tenets of identity throughout the world. Today's video is going to focus on religion's role as a cause and facilitator of ethnic conflicts, as well as a legitimizer of violence. Examples will be discussed in detail, ranging from Rwanda to South Sudan to Northern Ireland. But before we get into that, while religion can indeed spark an ethnic conflict, it is rarely the sole factor in its outbreak. When it does occur, it is usually when governments begin ruling through their framework of religion. Theocratic states are becoming rarer in the 21st century, which in part could explain the relative rarity of religion being a sole cause. While this may be supported by ethnic groups of the same religion inside the state, a minority ethnic group with a different religion are forced to comply by said theocracy. The majority group may do this to strengthen their religion's status in the state if they felt it was in some way under threat. This could theoretically occur in only a minority of states worldwide. This is because out of 268 ethnic groups globally who were politically active in the 1990s, only 105 were religiously differentiated from the majority group of the state which they lived, compared to 163 which were not. But when it does occur, it is often a dominant factor, if an ethnic conflict does indeed break out. This is in part due to the fact that not all ethnic conflicts include multiple religious groups, and of course, that not all ethnic divisions are religious in nature. One example of religion as a central cause is the Sudanese Civil War, fought between 1983 and 2005. The main religion in Sudan was Islam, especially in the northern section of the country, which are predominantly Arab. The south was mainly dominated by Christians of a separate ethnic group. Traditionally, the country was ruled from the north by Islamic elites. This was entrenched during decolonization when Sudan gained independence from the British Empire. During the 1980s, Sudan introduced Sharia law in their legal system. This was to apply to both Muslims and non-Muslim citizens alike. This discrimination, on top of the increasing relevance of Islam in Sudan's politics, frustrated the South as well as Northern Christians. The Southern Christians rose in opposition to this, and the Second Civil War broke out. It killed between 1 to 2 million people from both disease, starvation, and massacres. Its ending resulted in Southern Sudan gaining independence in 2011, becoming the youngest nation in the world. For the first time in history, the people of South Sudan now live under their own state. But tensions with predominantly Muslim Sudan remains. There have already been violent clashes in the contested Abbot region, as well as clashes over access to oil, which is plentiful in the south. Religion was a core cause of this ethnic conflict, although the legacy of the First Sudanese Civil War and access to natural resources did play a part. But Sudan's pursuit of religious governance was supported by many Muslim citizens, and yet it directly sparked a conflict with their minorities. The southern Sudanese viewed the conflict as one of national liberation with Christianity at its core. Opposition to Islamification and the belief in a secular Christian state was the dominant political vision for them. This trend of Christian theology dominating their political culture continues to this day. While South Sudan have officially adopted state secularism, many have criticized this as mere words. Christianity is a core part of their identity, and their pursuit of religious freedom caused many to take up arms to produce the state. The Muslim-Christian divide has not disappeared, however. For Muslims in the south, they have become minorities overnight. To them, the state is using so-called secularism to suppress Islam. Muslims are told in public to go home to the north, despite being southern. This is understandable in the context of South Sudan's identity, which is built off opposition to northern Muslim elites. As such, religion continues to cause ethnic tensions, which may once again turn violent, especially as Sudan is once again experiencing civil war. Religion has also had a long tradition of sustaining ethnic conflict on the island of Ireland. The divide stems from the 17th century plantation of Ireland, when British Protestants, mainly Presbyterian and Anglican, came to Ireland as colonists. The legacy of this has caused various conflicts, with the most recent example being the Troubles in Northern Ireland. The conflict was mainly between largely Catholic nationalists who wanted a united Ireland and largely Protestant Unionists who wanted to remain in the United Kingdom. The partition of Ireland in 1921 had left a minority of both groups on opposite sides of the border between the North and the Republic. The conflict ended with the Good Friday Peace Agreement signed in 1998, but not before 3,800 people lost their lives. The conflict has made Northern Ireland one of the most well-researched areas on the planet. It remains the most well-known example of an ethnic conflict in Western Europe post-World War II. The reason for the violence is multifaceted and due in part to the legacy of previous conflicts. While religion did certainly contribute to the outbreak of violence, the conflict was primarily a political one between the two ethnic groups. Paramilitaries were not driven by religion to violence, but instead, religion generally determined an individual's ethnic identity. This often translated into either having unionist or nationalist political views. Religion also helped sustain the conflict by entrenching differences. The Catholic Church was heavily embedded in Irish society since the devotional revolution in the 20th century. Having a presence in virtually all Catholic communities, only the GAA rivaled in its near universal influence. The Church had, and in some cases still does, control of both education and healthcare. This meant that society in Ireland was divided between religion, with Catholics going to Catholic schools and hospitals, and Protestants going to Protestant ones. In fact, since 1831, primary schools for Catholics have been primarily under the Church's control on the island. In Northern Ireland, state schools functioned as Protestant schools, as the state institutions were dominated by Protestant politicians. The effect of this is that although Protestants and Catholics lived side by side, they functionally lived in two separate communities. Even today, 90% of children in Northern Ireland go to schools owned by their religious denomination. Some have gone as far as to describe this phenomenon as self-imposed apartheid. Even today, 25 years after the end of the conflict, the separation of the two groups is physically embodied in the peace walls that divide nationalist and unionist areas. In this example, religion, while not primarily causing the conflict, did help maintain a divided society that in turn fostered violence. religion amplified the differences between the two ethnic groups who lived side by side and yet made them operate in separate communities. This division went beyond just healthcare and schooling. A divided society such as this more easily falls into instability and conflict than a unified one. Religion also had a strong presence in Northern Ireland's state institutions and political culture. Priests or pastors were often key political representatives for their parishes, as they often had unrivaled influence in the area. In this role, they had a limited ability to help the two communities bridge the divide, which many did successfully during the peace process of the 1990s. But they also had the ability to entrench differences, and that did in part contribute to the conflict. The issue of religious division remains in Northern Irish society. The desegregation of schooling remains a key political issue in Northern Irish politics. There are promising signs of integrated schooling becoming mainstream. When polled, 90% of citizens consider integrated schooling a way to achieve a better future. And I reckon they're probably right. Religion can also be used to legitimize violence during ethnic conflicts. The Rwanda genocide of the 1990s is a prime example. In less than 100 days in 1994, somewhere between 500,000 and 1 million people were murdered in the closing phases of the Rwandan civil war. The victims were largely part of the Tutsi minority, who were targeted by the Hutu majority in the context of a long-standing ethnic divide in the country. It was directly organized by the Hutu government and was a planned ethnic cleansing campaign. A large section of the Catholic Church in the country took an active role in this campaign to an unbelievable degree. They encouraged Hutus to carry out such massacres and let massacres occur on their church grounds. In fact, a common theme amongst the massacres was that most did indeed occur on church grounds. For example, Nairobi massacre saw 20,000 civilians slaughtered in the Catholic Church outside Rwanda's capital, Kigali. This was done using spears, machetes, and guns on the 15th of April 1994. Some priests took an even more active role, such as priest Antony Sarumba, who bulldozed his own church after filling it with thousands of Tutsi refugees in the parish of Nyange. He would later become the first Catholic priest to be charged with genocide in court, and is now serving a life sentence for crimes against humanity. In this example, religion did not cause the outbreak of violence, but did help facilitate the genocide by religious institutions directly participating in the killings. In this example, religion played an active role more than in the case of Sudan or indeed Northern Ireland. This is despite the fact that it was not a source of the conflict. It reflects the complicated relationship between faith and ethnic conflict, and how varied the role of religion can be. Religion also helped legitimize using violence against Tutsi civilians during the genocide. Religious leaders made the killings socially acceptable in their communities. While not all Rwandan priests were involved in the killing, some helped organize and execute the massacres. In the case of Mr. Sarumba, he organized the militia and they followed his orders directly. You can imagine that some participants had to have been swayed by their local priest to do actions they otherwise would not have done. Such is the power of religious leaders in ethnic conflicts. The Catholic Church's role has since been recognized by the Vatican, with Pope Francis issuing a plea for forgiveness for the priests who succumbed to hatred and violence. It is also worth noting that the second biggest denomination, Protestantism, also carried out similar atrocities. The thirst for killing transcended sex. In all the examples supplied above, religion has had a negative influence on the conflict in question. But this is not always the case. It is important to remember religion. Fuck. In all the examples supplied above, religion has had a negative influence on the conflict in question. But this is not always the case. It is important to remember religion can have a positive impact on conflicts by facilitating peace. In fact, it is often argued that religion's ability to cause violence is equal to its power as a force for peace. Religious leaders are usually key in opening dialogue between communities and representing their people during peace talks. Empowering religious leaders that are open to peace at the expense of leaders who advocate violence is a common tactic used by peace builders. This is especially true when both ethnic groups are members of the same religion. It can be a uniting force in such situations. It is less effective when multiple religions and sects are represented in the ethnic groups in conflict. In Iraq, with a dozen different minority groups that follow various religions from Islam to Yazidism, it is vastly more difficult to do this than in Northern Ireland, where the two ethnic groups in conflict belong to Christianity. But it is still possible if those within religious institutions are open to peace. Religion should be seen not as a positive or negative force, but rather a tool that can be used for either. It is up to those within its power structures to create a lasting peace or help perpetuate further conflict. So, does religion cause war? What we can see from these examples is that religion has a complicated role in ethnic conflicts throughout the world. Its role can vary greatly as a cause, sustainer, or facilitator of violence. It can be used to create peace or have no role in an ethnic conflict at all. In Sudan, a religious divide fueled the secession of South Sudan. The North wanted religious laws that contradicted the religion of the southern population. In this example, it is a direct cause. In Northern Ireland, religion entrenched the ethnic divide between Catholics and Protestants by creating separate community institutions. This helped sustain the conflict, but was not a singular cause of violence. In Rwanda, religion directly facilitated the genocide of the Tutsi by helping to carry out massacres using church property and the actions of some religious leaders. In that example, religion was instrumental in the genocide as much as the political leadership. And there are ethnic conflicts where religion plays no significant role at all. Religious institutions vary in how they utilize their power, and this can alter the conflict's direction, either positively or negatively. What can be gathered from this is that conflict is something that occurs in all human societies, the same as religious beliefs. The two can be intimately entwined or separate completely. The political and historical context in which a conflict arises often determines which it will be. Thanks very much for watching, guys. And if you haven't subscribed, be sure to do so. I'll see you next time.